666.
My one big thing this week, a new American-led naval task force will patrol the waters off Yemen to hopefully put a sizable dent in the arms and other smuggling that goes on in those crucial international waterways, some of which benefits the Houthis in Yemen, and also to help prevent attacks by the Houthis on other ships that traverse those waterways. Here's what we know. The new task force will be part of the Combined Maritime Forces, which is a multinational maritime partnership of 34 countries, led, of course, by the preponderant United States and including Saudi Arabia, France, the UK, and other allies in the region. U.S. Fifth Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, who oversees the Combined Maritime Forces and is not the Hollywood actor, announced the new task force in a call with reporters. The new task force is actually the fourth under the CMF command, joining three others. All of them sort of have to deal with counter-piracy, and then there's one for the Arabian Gulf and one for outside the Arabian Gulf. The task force would ensure also a force presence and deterrent posture in the Red Sea and critically in the Bab al-Mandab and Gulf of Aden, really critical waterways that David DeRoche discussed as critical. Colonel Brad Gandy was on the program a few weeks ago, also discussed this. Cooper did not mention the Houthis by name, but when asked about the air raids on Yemen on U.S. partners, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Cooper said the task force would impact the Houthis' ability to obtain the weaponry needed for such attacks. He said, quote, "We'll be able to do it more vibrantly and more directly than we do today." We're looking at between 2 and 8 ships that will patrol at any time, and that will include the USS Mount Whitney, a Blue Ridge-class amphibious command ship. Richard, this is the latest in a sea change. Is another word I've used twice already in a very short time, and pun intended. Evolving situation in Yemen after the Saudi-led coalition worked diligently for an extended ceasefire there, of course, moving President Hadi aside, as you said, in favor of a governing council. But really, it's the latest in U.S.-Saudi relations, which are kind of picking up a bit. People are sort of saying that they're at a nadir, or even a recent nadir. But, in fact, sort of America seems to be responding a little bit to the so-called snub of the President Biden phone call. Just kind of the latest in American sensitivity to Saudi security needs here. So I thought this was an interesting story.
Yeah, I think that captures it. I mean, it's on the Saudi side. It felt like the U.S. was a bit tone deaf and we're not responding to their real issues. This is one way to indicate and signal that they're still very deeply concerned and involved with and committed to the Gulf security, and especially in terms of transit and trade. It is an issue, so it's a nice extension of that task force responsibilities, combined with things like Secretary of State Tony Blinken, going to speak with the Mohammed bin Zayed and essentially apologizing for their what the Emiratis considered an inappropriate response to missile attacks from the Houthis. Mm-hmm. I think there's a growing sense within the administration. I suppose, and we count on this, that there are folks, executives, staffers, political appointees who are thinking ahead with regard to how we want to approach Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and maybe trying to imagine better approaches and more evolved approaches. But at this juncture, I think we're playing catch up, and it's important to play catch up. If that means going to apologize to MBZ and setting up task forces for security and being responsive in other ways, it's important to do so because the relationship is critical in so many ways, and it needs to be handled. It can't just be, us reprimanding them about human rights or demanding that they pump more oil. It's just got to be more evolved and more comprehensive and just more imaginative than that, because I think this is an important place for us. And anyway, but in the near term, I think right now it's just sort of trying to make up ground. Mm-hmm. And these are things that are helpful in that regard.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this with Afshin, but there was a report this week in The Intercept on sort of 30 lawmakers on the Hill writing a frankly sort of outdated, in my opinion, and a very tone deaf, note to the Biden administration asking for a recalibration of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And it seemed very antiquated. And, while that is going on the Hill, you have the on the ground military to military coordination, like this new task force, that's, evidence that the relationship is actually getting a little stronger and being a little bit more responsive to dynamics on the ground.
Well, it's the nature of a democratic system, and the people each have factions and they have interests that they voice in. And there are some people who think that we should only look at Saudi Arabia through the lens of human rights, or that it should only be determined by what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. And again, we've talked about this in the past. Not to diminish what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, not to diminish the fact that there are human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, but it's a more complex, more evolved relationship than that, and it doesn't take into account what Saudi Arabia is trying to do across the spectrum in terms of its economy and its society. As you said, to me it's a incomplete approach to the relationship. Mm-hmm. And we get in trouble, I think, when we base an approach simply on one issue, and that seems to be the case for many of these folks. It happens to be a strong bit of this in the Democratic Party, so President Biden needs to deal with this on the political side. Mm-hmm. And as with so many things with the U.S., our foreign policy is dictated too often by our domestic policy. To the detriment, I think, to our global interests in many cases, not just Saudi Arabia. But this is the way it is, and it's the way it always has been, and probably always will be.
Yeah, well said. What do you think? Let's get to our interview and conversation with Afshin Malavi. He's fantastic, and I think our listeners are going to absolutely love this.
I'm so excited. He's a great integrator, brings real insight, and provides context to big issues. This is going to be awesome.